Okay, well, afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of Taking Action Together, which is part of this climate emergency event that Kevin and his colleagues are setting up or have set up for today. My name's Phil Brennan. I am head of APSE Energy. We are a local government organisation, and I'll explain a bit more about us in a minute. This session is around, as you can see on the screen, carbon literacy training, and I'll be talking for about 15 minutes, or a bit shorter hopefully, and there's somebody else who's going to join us, Rachel Coxcoon from the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and she's also a councillor at Cotswold District Council, so she will make a contribution after I've finished. Hopefully then we'll have some time for questions and answers before we wrap up. That should take around 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then there might be some time afterwards if there's an opportunity for some internal discussion if we want to take it that far. There is the chat function if you want to raise any questions as we're going along, and we'll answer those at the end of the session. So please feel free to raise any issues in there if you want to do that. Right, okay, so I will go through these series of slides that I've got. Let me just get that working now. Okay, so as I say, I work for APSE Energy. The Association for Public Service Excellence is a local government only organisation. Councils are members, and we provide a range of services, some of which you can see on the screen there, around training, around briefings, around information in general, to support the local government sector, and we are advocates for councils across the UK. We've got about 300 councils who are members, and it's the council that's the member rather than the individual officer or councillor. APSE Energy is part of that wider APSE family, with the aim of the municipalisation of energy and a greater role for local authorities in the energy agenda in their area. More recently, of course, that's spread to climate emergency, climate change and sustainability in general. So although we're called APSE Energy, we have a wider remit than that really. 144 local authorities are members, and there's a whole range of reasons why they're members and a whole range of activities that we provide for them. So that's where I'm coming from. In terms of carbon literacy and carbon literacy training, this came about from BEI's government department, who were looking for something that could be provided to a range of different organisations, different types of audience, in order to do exactly what it says on the tin, really, help people to become carbon literate. It's part of the Carbon Literacy Project, which is run from Manchester, and there's a range of providers for that training. They've got to be accredited trainers, and it's an attempt to keep a range of audiences and individuals up to date and in touch with what's going on, so that they can pass that knowledge on, both in the way they work and in the way they behave themselves. Of course, it's linked to the climate emergency. A number of climate emergency declarations have stated in there that we will provide some training, we'll provide education, sometimes a very generic statement, sometimes a bit more specific. We will, for example, put all our staff through a carbon literacy exercise. Either way, it's provides support to some of the actions on those climate emergency declarations. And as it says there, there's support from BEI's, who helped set up the training in the first place. This is a slide that I took from the carbon literacy website yesterday, I think it was. Just shows the kind of scale of what's going on, really. 15,000 certified citizens, a number of different carbon literate organisations, a range of national engagement. So there's an awful lot going on with it. It's well established exercise and training course, and as it says there, 15,000 people have gone through it already. No doubt that's much expanded now. I was just talking to a colleague of mine. She said that the course, or one of the courses that we've got set up for December for local authority staff and councillors, is oversubscribed. So it kind of reflects the demand for it, I suppose. So I'm just going to go through some examples of what's involved in it, some examples of content from it, and explain the outline, really, to give you an idea of what it's all about and why councils might want to get involved. So it lasts for a day. It can be a single day or 2 half days. There are opportunities for smaller kind of bite-sized versions, but they're not certified in the way that the full day training is certified. There's a series of outcomes which are, there's a form to complete, which essentially says there are 2 actions that you will complete that you wouldn't previously do and that you are doing as a result of the training and the extended kind of knowledge that you've got. And they can be team related, they can be work-based, home-based, wherever it might be. But the fact is, that is a specific outcome, and your certificate will be given on the basis that you are, or that those actions are appropriate for the work in the opinion of an assessor. So there's an external assessment element to this, which makes it a bit more robust. In terms of the content, there are case study examples. There's a range of content, really, which helps for different audiences and the level of knowledge within different audiences, and it helps to keep it a bit more interactive and a bit more interesting and lively. In terms of service specific and location specific, there are 5 versions of the training. So there's a local authority version, which is, of course, what I'm interested in. There's a civil service version, an education version, an emergency service version, and an NHS version. So, of course, they'll all be different audiences, all with different working environments and context and levels of interest. So it's not as if it's a specific course for everyone. A single course, it gets altered, and of course you can add your own specific element to the course prior to setting it. So if you have an in-house course just for your authority, then, or just for your organisation, whatever that organisation is, you can put in local examples of problems you might have, of previous examples of flooding, for example, or changes that your organisation has made in order to meet climate emergency issues. Okay, so this is just an outline of what goes on with the training and what we're trying to achieve. As I say, it's local authority based. I think the objectives are pretty similar, irrelevant of the organisation, to be honest with you, but still the principles are there. These slides will be available afterwards, by the way, so there's no need to worry if I'm going through them quite quickly. It's split up into 4 elements. There's the science of climate change. There's something there around policies and a policy background. The actions that you can take within your council. Obviously, this is the council version, and there's the final unit 4 is around planning, influencing, action planning. Just some examples and just some kind of some of the content. Some of this stuff's pretty, or you might consider it to be pretty basic. Really, some people know this kind of information better than others. Just click onto the next one. The idea is to make people literate. It's not to provide the most up-to-date scientific technological detail. It's about making people think and question and discuss and debate. So these are just some of the slides that are used. Let me click through them here. Facts and figures, the kind of the context that we're working in, some of the data that's up there and available. And again, this just prompts a range of questions. It makes people think about what the context is. Some of this can be made local. This is an example in Worcestershire. This is the kind of thing where you might think, okay, we've got local examples that we can put into the course and do that beforehand. Again, there's a range of facts and figures here which people will be interested in using to pass the message on. So, for example, this is an ideal example for highways guys who might be working in a local authority. Some of whom may not appreciate the severity of the situation, and of course, this is the kind of stuff that you would use to make the case within the organisation if you or one of your colleagues has been on the training. Examples of climate strategies, examples of climate emergency declarations, action plans can all be put in there. And there's opportunity for interaction. So, you know, the type of things that you take for granted, bread, you know, using, eating, buying bread, disposing of it, all those, there's a whole range of facts and figures behind this. You can get people to say, okay, which is the most, you know, important or least important, or how the, where in the process of the life of a loaf of bread are most emissions produced, you know, and some of this stuff is quite eye-opening when you look at the results and the data behind an everyday thing like a loaf of bread. Again, you know, we are raising questions here, and some of the type of things that you might want to look at. For example, a local authority perspective again, what does a low carbon system look like? A low carbon energy system, for example, look like in terms of what a local authority does? How can you impact on the transport that a local authority uses, whether that's the transport policy that it's looking to influence within its area, or its own transport, its own vehicles. So again, number of activities going on there. There's a focus on communications. Obviously, this is a message that will be passed on. It's a message that it's a learning exercise for those who attend the training, but equally that will be passed on to others by those people who attend. And it goes into how you get the message over to a variety of audiences, for example, you know, how you tell that story, who you want to look for, which influencers you want to look for, which learning styles they might have. So there's a range of advice in the training for that as well. Part of it is developing an action plan, and that is, as I say, actions that you individually might take. Okay, I'm going to cycle to work 2 days a week from now on, or my team will look to put a particular project in place. So there's a need to provide an actual outcome at the end of the event. You don't have to do it actually on the day, but you know, you have to fill it in within a couple of weeks. Send that off to the external assessor. They will say yes, it's an appropriate thing to do. It's not just something that you know that won't make any impact, and you will get your certificate based on that action plan. And of course, that makes people think again about the wider actions that they will take for their organisation. So all councils that have declared an emergency will have a high-level action plan. There will be within that individual action plans for different services or different projects or schemes. There's a range of support that we can provide to that. You know, as I say, APSE Energy is in place, only in place actually to support the local authority sector, and this is a major piece of work that local authorities are going to be involved in. You know, at the moment, into the foreseeable future without end. It's unusual because a lot of local authority work is time-based or time-limited. So, for example, you look at something in an engagement, from an engagement perspective that councils are involved in, and you might think the local plan is something that, you know, goes on, used to go on for a number of years, now still goes, you know, it's still a long-term exercise, maybe over a 12-month exercise in terms of engagement. There isn't really very much that councils are involved in which goes on for that long around a specific issue. The climate emergency, climate change in general, is something that councils are going to be doing for a long time to come. They're going to be dealing with generations of people as they grow old, as they maybe get more or less involved in this, and it's unusual. It's an unusual exercise really in terms of the longevity of it and how councils are going to engage with different groups over long periods of time, and, you know, use all the usual social media, get them involved in person, and keep them involved and keep them interested. But it is something that councils have got to do, and this kind of training is something that can help them in that aim of influencing what goes on in their authority. Now, there are different ways of doing that. You know, some councils have decided to just send one person along to the event, to the training. Others have had us go along to them and train maybe 20 people from their authority. Others have decided to say, over the long term, we are going to get all the staff and all the councillors carbon literate over a period of a year, for example. So there's different ways of doing it. You know, we're working on a e-learning version of this. Different people provide it, and there's a need for a number of providers, obviously, because of the expected demand. So there's a variety of ways of looking at it, a variety of ways of learning how to become carbon literate, and really, you know, no doubt it will develop over time as well as we're going along. Okay, that's me done for the time being. I'm presuming that Rachel is with us.
I am indeed.
Rachel, hi. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Rachel. Rachel's going to look at things from a council perspective. As I say, Rachel works for the Centre for Sustainable Energy. She's also a councillor at Cotswold District Council. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you.
I'll stop sharing my slides.
And I will attempt to share mine. I think we'd all be better at this by now, wouldn't you? Right, 1 minute. Now if you can see.
Can't see any slides yet.
That might just be a slow moment on the broadband. Right. Can you see?
Yes. Got that?
Yes. Okay.
Oh,
good.
Just the slides on its own.
Just the slides on its own, is it? That's fine.
The notes there as well.
Right. Okay. Hang on then. Let me unshare that one. Trying to find screen 2. That'll be the one. All right.
Yes.
That better? Okay. Great. Good. Okay, thank you, Phil, and sorry for being late. I accidentally was sent the link to a completely different session. So I was sitting there thinking, I don't know anything about this. I hope they're not expecting me to speak on this topic. Okay, so yeah, I'm here to talk about specifically a carbon literacy course that I've put together over the last couple of months that's specifically aimed at the political leadership of local authorities, as well as the sort of the very senior executive group. And it's come out of work that I've been doing more widely at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, who some of you I'm sure will be familiar with, but not everybody. We're an organisation based in Bristol, Bristol-based charity, but we work nationally doing research work as well as community energy support and local household energy support, household energy advice and retrofit schemes and so on. And within that organisation, I run the Climate Emergency Support Programme that's aimed at local government at all levels. So we do quite a lot of work with town and parish councils as well as districts and unitaries and counties and so on. And so over about the last year, we've been going out and sort of saying, you know, what do councils need and what are the kind of things that we as a charitable organisation can provide through the scheme that we're running. And it became clear, you know, from talking to councils that, so I'm just going to sort of put into context why I then decided that it would be really great to have a carbon literacy course that was very specifically aimed at the sort of political leadership of councils rather than the wider day-to-day operational staff. So I've got a couple of slightly facetious pie charts to demonstrate where I came from with this. But over the last year, I've been working with and talking to local authorities at all sorts of levels, many of whom have declared a climate emergency, but not all of them. And what I'm really seeing is this sort of split. There's nothing scientific about this pie chart, but we've got some councils where what we've got are members that a climate emergency declaration was pushed through quite often in places where there'd been a change of political control in the last year in the 2019 elections, but not exclusively. And they're really pushing at it and feeling like they're just hitting a brick wall with certain officers and can't get it through. So we've got some places where the climate emergency work seems to be very politically driven, but it hasn't really been grasped at the officer level. And then the reverse of that is probably more councils that I speak to are officers who are saying, yeah, there's been a declaration. Yeah, there seems to be political sort of interest in this and a lot of public verbiage about it, but they don't quite get it. And most importantly, they haven't given us enough money or resource or time. And obviously with that COVID hitting, then that has got worse because everybody's attention's been distracted. Then we've got this smaller group of councils where I'm still being contacted by officers who want to do everything they can about the climate emergency, but feel like we can't get our members on board. They don't want to declare a climate emergency. They're almost frightened now at this point of jumping on a bandwagon, and they feel they need to understand more about it than they maybe would have a year ago when they would have done this. But now they feel like they don't want to be seen to just jumping on a bandwagon. So it's almost become a barrier. Then we've got a few small councils where it feels like everybody's working in concert except for procurement, and everything sort of falls down at the procurement funnel. And then I haven't met them yet, but I think there's a council out there somewhere where everybody's on board and everybody understands how important, how difficult, how immediate, and the scale of this problem. Officers and members are working in concert. There's no political infighting. And when I meet that council, I'll be thrilled, but I haven't met them yet. So that's the kind of landscape that I see. And then I'm also seeing this feeling that, and this is particularly true of the sort of political end, is that there is often, despite the fact that an awful lot of climate emergency declarations were unanimously supported, there's a real mismatch between a general desire to do something and a feeling that we should make a declaration and make this central, and then a grasp of what is it that we actually now need to do. So we're seeing, on the one hand, when you look at the climate emergency declarations, they're often partly because a lot of them were copied and pasted as well as that kind of bandwagon rolled on last summer. They're committing to really quite significant and radical, far-reaching change and visions in some cases for an entire district, not just the council's own operations. But then the conversations very quickly seem to settle back into what you might call traditional environmental projects that we might do. So we've got to sort of, we've declared a climate emergency, it's all terrible, humanity might be extinct within 40 years. We really ought to plant a few trees, and it's all a bit out of kilter with, we've declared this terrible thing, but what we're planning to do about it doesn't seem to be in scale. And that suggests a lack really of everyone being on the same page and everyone really understanding what's needed. And particularly when then, as referring back to my first made up pie chart, that there's a lot of officers saying, I'm being expected to deliver the moon on a stick with no extra money and no extra people, and then a pandemic obviously hasn't helped that. So a feeling that really there needs to be a way of bringing everyone onto the same page so that there can be genuine political will and a genuine understanding at the political level of what's going to happen, even if you've already declared a climate emergency. So decided, therefore, that there needed to be a course that was very specifically aimed at political leaders. And as a local councillor myself, that I found that meant I could sort of think about, well, what are the barriers that particularly local councillors face in trying to push this agenda forward, or what barriers would they face in trying to deal with this agenda? And some of those are very, prosaic barriers around the fact that councillors may have full-time jobs as well as what they're doing, and their full-time jobs may be nothing whatsoever to do with the environment or climate emergency. So they're trying to be a councillor, a ward councillor, potentially a portfolio holder for something like business and economy, and at the same time get themselves up to speed to really get to grips with the climate emergency so that they can then start thinking about everything through that lens. And that's quite an ask, really, when they're often doing this on top of a full-time job as well. So the course I've put together is basically, it follows much as Phil just described, the same sort of core competencies around. You have to understand the basic climate science, you have to understand what's causing climate change and where greenhouse gases come from and so on. And you need to understand the impacts, and this is part of the core officers course, and in fact every core carbon literacy course, what will be the impacts nationally and globally, and start boiling that down, as Phil was pointing out, how will this happen where we are right here, right now. But then more widely, local politicians and the sort of senior executive team at a council also need to understand that their more important role in some ways is not to say we've declared a climate emergency, where can we put the solar panels on our buildings? Because particularly in relatively small district councils, they don't own a very big estate. It's very different for a lot of the big core cities, but that they have to have this outward their biggest and more important role is how they bring the population of their district with them. And it's this leadership role and this role that they need to play about understanding how do they communicate the climate emergency with everybody that lives there, with their businesses, and make it relevant to them and not make it feel like they've just suddenly, you know, taken up some campaign. And I particularly find this with councillors of certain political parties. They're nervous about feeling like they've suddenly just jumped ship and joined a different political party. You know, if you suddenly all start spouting off language that sounds like it's come straight out of the Green Party leaflet and you've never ever been associated with the Green Party, then that can kind of greatly undermine how you then engage with your wider constituents and your voter base. So it's helping councillors understand how to communicate about the climate emergency in terms that fit their worldview and therefore fit the worldview of the sort of people that will vote for them. Because we all know, those of us who are councillors, that to some large degree, you spend some time talking to people that you know will vote for you. And there is an element of saying these people will never vote for me because they don't have my worldview. So you have to understand how their worldviews work so that you can talk about climate change on their terms and not on your terms. And so that's kind of partly what this course is looking at. So just to briefly cover, it covers the same sort of structure as the officers course. Climate science, the morning session is largely covering very similar to the officers course, climate science, but there's a lot more focus on the history of climate science and denialism. And that's really important, particularly because there is a big defensiveness about talking about climate change within a particular age bracket and within a particular income bracket. And that's essentially older people who are feeling like they're being blamed. People who've sort of my age and upwards, mid 40s up to sort of 70s, feel like we're the people who are being blamed for all of this trouble. And they can very easily get defensive. And when you look at that, that's squarely the age range of the average councillor, you know, probably even slightly older than that. So you have to be able to talk about what happened, why did we know about the science but not do anything about it, and kind of allow that moment of catharsis about how much work was done to confuse and obfuscate and deny the science, and how that's fed through into popular discourse over 20 or 30 years. So for people in this age bracket, they've been exposed to this sophisticated attempt to undermine their understanding, and they need to get their head around that before they can feel comfortable with this blame game part of it. So we move on from the sort of history of science and so on onto the local impacts, really get people thinking, who am I in my village, in my ward? How will this impact us? How will this impact the people that I serve? So it's very much from that politician side of point of view again, and then looking at the legislation and the policy, what we already signed up to, what are our targets, and the kind of brief economics around investments and, you know, the cost of action versus inaction. And then the afternoon is a much more facilitated sessions looking at communications. How do we communicate climate change? It's everything I was just saying about what makes a good climate conversation and how do we accommodate everybody's worldviews. And I'm really looking at this research that's going to be launched on Wednesday this week, which I've already had pre-access to. The Britain Talk to focus how we communicate across the segments of British society. Then action planning, but particularly building an action plan looking at all our levers of influence. So not just that inward facing, what do we do with our own estate, but how do we bring the community with us? How do we showcase good practice? How do we engage? How do we convene? Because all of those are the powers that the leadership at a local authority has. And then sort of finishing up with, much as it does with some of the officers and other courses, around what are you going to do? What's your personal footprint? Do you understand your own impact? They go away and as with all carbon literacy, they need to sort of pledge to do some actions afterwards, one of which is to engage. Because of this year and because of COVID, this is something I'm delivering on Hopin, a platform that is sort of online conferencing platform. And the benefit of that is it allows us to firstly use a stage, which allows us to show a lot of video, but also there's an expo. And that's really important to allow councillors from one area to see what other areas are doing, because everyone's got their own brilliant case study, but no one's doing everything. So to be able to bring all that together in one place, I'll skip that one through into this sort of set of booths that people can see, means you can make a much richer learning environment where people can then spend time saying, okay, now I get this, I'm going to go and see what Waltham Forest are doing, whereas I'm from Cumbria, so I never would have known about Waltham Forest otherwise, and that sort of thing. As with a lot of the carbon literacy, and as in why APSE are doing the officer training in particular, is, you know, you need to have some peer understanding of the environment within which your trainers, your delegates, sorry, have to operate. So I find it very useful as a local councillor to be able to train other councillors, because I recognise the political reality of how they have to work. And And my personal view, Phil could comment on this, about how some councils are sending along one person from their officer group to be trained. It's my view that everybody from a local authority should be trained, because it should be like health and safety. It should be like child safeguarding. Everybody should have the climate emergency in their head and know that it's their job and not something that they, palm off to the climate change manager. And we've piloted it in North Somerset and running it now in Liverpool. And we're getting some really good feedback, but I particularly loved a cabinet member at North Somerset, because it was difficult when we went around. A full day's training is hard for politicians to commit to, and there was a sense of, could we just do something smaller, could we just whatever, and we really pushed for piloting it in the full day form, so that we get the full emotional roller coaster of we're all doomed, through to this is how we'll bring everyone with us, and this is how we're going to action plan and give our officers the mandate and be serious with each other about how much money this is going to cost. And so I think this from the cabinet member at North Somerset is a really nice vindication of the fact that we did go ahead and do that as a full day course. And that's it from me. That's my contact details if anyone wants to talk to me about councillor training in particular, and I'll hand back over to Phil and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Rachel. Just before we go any further, there's one question which says, is Rachel's course separate to carbon literacy training?
No.
Part of?
Yeah, so no, so it is carbon literacy training. It's an accredited carbon literacy training, but it's specifically for political leadership, and we sort of encourage senior, your chief exec, your head of paid service, your head of finance, and so on. There's probably 6 or 7 very senior officers within a local authority that engage very regularly with the politicians and are, have to operate within that political level as well. And I think it's useful if they also attend. And not least because the action planning session is really, it's not there so that the politicians can build an action plan, that because they have qualified and competent officers to do that, but they have to go through the motions of doing it to really understand the scope of what a holistic climate emergency action plan would be. And then that's what gives officers the mandate to say, right, well, you did say we ought to be doing this kind of thing. So yes, it is carbon literacy training, but it's specifically aimed at the sort of political class rather than the officer structure.
Okay, good. Just going back to the point that you made around who might attend this, and whether it's, you should send one person or your whole officer corps and councillor corps. I agree. Resources permitting, this is a great course to get councillors and officers on, and other organisations as well for that matter. But I think the point is, one of the reasons for that is because it's not very often that some of the more or officers outside of that group that you're talking about, the directors or the most senior officers, are able to sit down in a room with councillors and have a discussion about something that the councillors want X doing, and the officers say, well, we're happy to do it, but it needs a priority. It needs that priority amongst a whole range of other priorities. So that's a benefit of it. As I said before, it raises a whole range of questions, some that some councillors hadn't thought of, some that some officers hadn't thought of. So it is a great forum for discussion, for discussing a priority, as well as educating and informing people and making them realise that there is an action plan here that's got to go with the declaration, and that's got to be spread around. People have got to know about it, and it's got to be known by those people who are going to contribute to it. Now, a couple of things come on from that. One is that we've had a number of courses where we've had councillors on it as well as officers, and exactly that discussion has been had. Sometimes a bit negative. That's down to personal views, and you would expect that kind of range of views anyway. The other issue is, if a council has made a council declaration, and obviously it's got to act on that declaration, which means having some kind of action plan, and it needs to come up with a range of actions within that action plan. Who is gonna come up with those? It's not going to be a corporate sustainability manager. They will come up with some, but they won't know how the leisure service works. They won't know how the air conditioning units work in in the crematorium, they won't know that level of detail. So if you're looking for a contribution from those service managers and those other people who are involved in delivering that service, you've got to make sure that you support them so that they know the context and they know the action planning process, what the cycle is for making those contributions and putting that plan in place. So you've got to support your staff before you can expect them to contribute, I think. So that's another great reason for going through the training. Just I'm just looking through the questions here. Some comments, some questions. Okay, so some people asking for the links again. I think we can do that.
We could just probably put a load of things in the chat bar all in one.
Yeah.
I can see a question from Fiona. Is this linked to the Carbon Literacy Project Toolkit for Leaders that's due to launch in January? Yes and no, in that I was already sort of working and talking to the Carbon Literacy Project about developing this and wanted to put that together, and I've said that they're very welcome to use the materials that I've now put together. But obviously the way carbon literacy works is people, and I think it was in Phil's slide, there's 159 courses out there, is that what it is a set of criteria that you have to have met rather than a set curriculum, as it were. So you have to be able to say, yes, when I've gone through this course with my learners, they will understand this about climate science, they will understand greenhouse gases and where they come from, the impact that they have, they will have made a pledge, they will have done, you know, group work on developing an action plan. So there's a bunch of criteria that you have to check. But it might be that what I've done is with my course is focused very heavily on what I think is important as a politician, which is around that outreach role, the communication role, the bringing the residents with you, whereas the wider leadership course, they might have more of the sort of senior officer stuff in there, and it might feel a little bit more. So as with a lot of carbon literacy material, there's an element of pick and mix because you're trying to build a course that meets the core criteria and the core competencies, I suppose, but make it as focused and as useful as possible for that learner group that you're trying to get to. So yes, I've shared all the materials. They've obviously been through and been accredited by Carbon Literacy, and I've shared the slide decks and so on. So they may incorporate some or all of it into the leadership course that will launch after Christmas.
There's another comment from Belinda. I assume I can deliver at town and parish council level. Yeah, you know, it's
funnily enough, that's a conversation I just had with Phil Corbell at Carbon Literacy last week about adapting it slightly for the parish level, because I've been asked, particularly by larger town councils, it's Lyme Regis, isn't it, Belinda? I've been asked by several larger town councils, could we have something? And there are some slight differences, but not a lot. So yes, I think it could easily be adapted. But again, it's just about that, making it as useful as possible for the context within which that group of learners has to operate and the influence that they have. But I'll happily share the material with you, Belinda, or we can chat offline.
Okay, there's somebody asking about costs of the service. That might be better through, cost of the training, which might be better through a specific email, really, because I think that might change depending on the circumstances.
Yeah. It depends on how many facilitators. It's quite a heavily facilitated course, the one that I run. So with North Somerset, we had officers from the council. And that's a brilliant thing about getting your officers on board, because then they can help facilitate the learning for councillors, or indeed it could work the other way around. If councillors did the learning first, they could co-facilitate an officers course. So it depends how many delegates and how many facilitators. But if you want to drop me an email about that, then I can discuss in more detail. Put my email address in.
Same with us, really, about the courses we're delivering. Okay. Any other questions you might want to raise? Put them in the chat. I think we're kind of covering most of the things that are covered up there. Hopefully.
I think Michael's asking the 159 carbon literacy courses. I think there are a few international ones, but largely it's a UK focus. Because there are ones, you know, I think actually even when you go on the Carbon Literacy website, there's a really nice case study video there about a course that the BBC ran, so for sort of media professionals. And I think, if from memory, that was run with their Bristol offices, where all the wildlife filming is done, where obviously how they plan all their travel and all that kind of thing for the sort of work that the BBC Wildlife Unit would do. I mean, that logistically must have the most enormous carbon footprint. And so it's getting them thinking about what can we change, and or if we can't change it, how do we offset, or, you know, are there any mechanisms by which we can create the benefit we do with the wildlife work that we do, but still tackle the climate emergency. So obviously what they went through, though the criteria will be the same, content-wise would have been really quite different to what a local authority would have done. So I think that's the beauty of the carbon literacy approach, is that it's about that overall framework rather than a very rigid set of materials that you have to work through.
Yeah, okay.
It's a big long chat file. I'm just seeing if there's anything else.
Any courses aimed at MPs or civil servants? Well, there is a civil service version of the course. Not something I've been involved in. And there's one for NHS. A question just come through there. So yeah,
yeah, there are.
The version for that. There's another version for the education sector and another version for emergency services. Again, you know, the principles are the same, but the context will be different and the content will be a little bit different. But
MPs, yeah, I've I've been wondering how to do one for MPs. I know some friendly MPs from the party I'm in, but sadly we don't have many MPs, so it would be more important to get the blue group on board, I think.
Yeah, well, there we are. Did someone say this morning the training was going to be free? My understanding is it isn't free.
No, I don't know what the session was this morning. I mean, the materials are freely available. So particularly within a local authority setting, if you're, you know, competent officers that know what they're doing, they can download a carbon literacy officers course and run sort of departmental training themselves. It's a big chunk of stuff, but it's very detailed the way it's laid out. But yeah, and I suppose any other councillor that fancied giving it a go, I'd be happy to talk through the course that I've developed if they wanted to run it for their own local authority. But otherwise, no, it's not always free. How do I find the NHS one? I would suggest that you just go directly to the Carbon Literacy website and send them an email, because not only will they be able to point you towards any freely available materials, but they might have trainers, someone who's helped to develop that course and has delivered it within an NHS setting.
Yeah, I think Michael talking about accessing the materials again. You know, if you're feeling competent enough to do the training, carry them out, then that's via the Carbon Literacy website, and they've got information about the materials and people who might be able to help you to put them into practice either yourself or with a bit of support. And
you can also get the information from them, because if you want your delegates to be certified as carbon literate afterwards, then there's a £10 a head fee that you pay directly to Carbon Literacy, but you need to understand what the evidence is, those forms that Phil showed a snippet of around this is our pledges and these are the actions, and how you have to collate that evidence within what time frame after the course and so on, and how you have to submit it all. And a number of local authorities, and I presume other organisations, are trying to become carbon literate organisations. So, you know, it's a kind of, not so much a badge of honour, but certainly a badge of knowledge, I suppose you could say, and a message to their local citizens, local businesses, that they're serious about the whole agenda and investing in their staff and partners. So, you know, we have councils who have said we are interested in providing this for different community leaders, people who are work outside of the council, and different partner organisations too. So, you know, it's not as if councils, or some councils anyway, are thinking a bit more widely than just their own staff and their own councils. Yeah, Alan has just asked a question. Do you know if there's one geared to SMEs? I think there is. There is a trainer that does some work for the Carbon Literacy Programme called Nicola Siddons, who I've come across, who I know has trained various small organisations in, I think it's the Manchester area. So if you contact Carbon Literacy and ask them, they may put you onto Nicola, or they may have a whole host of Nicolas. It's just she's the only one I've ever met.
Okay. Yeah, unless there's anything you want to add, Rachel. You know, we could talk about this whole afternoon, I think, a bit more wider than just the training, but certainly as far as the training goes, if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, members not wanting to spend any money even on training. I mean, that's fundamentally it. At some point, someone has to say, well, then we'll rip up the climate emergency declaration and put it in the bin because it's clearly bunkum. You don't believe in it if you're not going to spend 500 quid getting some training done. So,
just as an anecdotal story, I spoke to a councillor from a council in the East Midlands 18 months ago. And this particular councillor said, we've just declared a climate emergency. I suppose we're going to have to put some money towards it. Now, of course, that little giggle was exactly my response. But of course, they don't have to put any money towards it because there's no responsibility and no duty for them to do that. You know, the duty lies with
not statutory,
not with any councillors. But of course, if you're going to make a declaration and you're going to use the term emergency in it, then of course you've got to put some money towards it. Otherwise, you know, you are open to an awful lot of criticism, as well as just acting in a you know, ridiculous way anyway. But there is that distinction between, you know, making a commitment, I suppose, and just being aspirational. You know, we are committed to doing something here. And our ambition is to be carbon neutral by 2025. You know, very ambitious. How much of that is a commitment and how much of it is an aspiration? And then you get into the arguments about, well, you know, we're looking at an operational exercise for the council, or are we looking at making the whole council's area carbon neutral when we're actually only producing 1 or 2 or 3% of the emissions in that area? So, you know,
that's why the leadership role is so important, because a lot of councils immediately get very focused inwards, and actually, you know, that this is absolutely that 98% of the district's emissions are not theirs, but they have this brand, this role, this recognition, this ability to communicate with everybody. They're not selling anything to anybody, so they have an almost unique position in bringing the community with them, and they need to recognise that that's a superpower for local authorities in many ways that makes them incredibly important. And I think, you know, Belinda was on here, I don't know if she's gone, but my view is that actually town and parish councils are equally important and should equally be declaring climate emergencies, because their levers of influence are similar. They have things they directly control, they have the placemaking power to some degree with neighbourhood planning and so on, but they also have an incredible ability to showcase and engage and convene people at a much more grassroots level. So this kind of understanding of carbon literacy and just banging on about getting people carbon literate, I think is so important, because I don't think it's possible to get to the end of a carbon literacy day and then go, yeah, I think we're still not going to spend any money on that. That doesn't feel important. You know, it's like somebody almost cried in the course I did for North Somerset by lunchtime, you know, and I'm quite proud of that. That's how bad it is. You know, like I feel really terrible, but that's how it should be. People should be having this epiphany in this moment. Oh, bloody hell, we do actually need to sort this out now. And yes, we probably should be looking at budgets, but also the co-benefits stuff comes out of it quite well. That's another part of carbon literacy, that actually, you know, the costs, yes, there are costs, but they're often the actions we need to take are things that we want to do anyway, for social outcomes, for health outcomes, for the local economy. So it's about kind of showing people how the investment pays for itself in potentially savings to the NHS and other sort of public services that they're all involved in delivering, and can help solve some of the most intractable problems that they're dealing with anyway, around obesity, around air quality, around whatever it is. So getting people to understand the nature of the climate emergency, but then also getting them to realise that many of the actions they do to tackle it would bring all these other benefits that are also their job, and in some cases their statutory duties, is actually quite eye-opening for some of them. That's it. I've finished ranting now. Sorry, Phil.
Okay. Well, I think we're over time. I think Adele's just there waiting to
waving.
screen actually, but just to say, certainly from our perspective, I think Rachel and I, thanks for taking the time to listen and making a contribution to their questions. Our email addresses are up on the screen or up on the chat if you want to follow up with either of us. And I think that's it, Rachel, unless you want to say anything else.
No, that's everything. Yeah, just again, thanks very much for logging on. I hope it was useful, and good luck with the climate emergency stuff you're doing.
Right, okay, thank you very much. And cheerio.
Thank you. Bye.